As President Trump escalates the war with Iran today, backlash from some of his strongest supporters.
This is not the United States' war.
My own feeling is no one should have to die for a foreign country. Our government's job is not to look out for Iran or for Israel. It's to look out for us.
I'm just going to be brutally frank. If it's going to be a hard slog, I mean, that was not pitched in the 2024 campaign. It just wasn't. We're going to bleed support.
I was promised that this wouldn't turn into a larger regional conflict. It's hard to believe it. It's hard to believe that at this point.
He was the no more endless wars candidate in 2016 and 2024, particularly, and this looks like an open betrayal of the base.
So, Michael, you first here. We have Trump, who's defended all the criticism by telling a journalist, quote, MAGA is Trump. But one professor told the Washington Post, quote, I think to them it feels legitimately like a betrayal on a fundamental tenet of Trumpism. Who gets to decide what MAGA is and who it's about? Certainly it's the president.
Hi, everyone. Adam is here. So what just happened? The walls are closing in. The man who built an entire political movement on the promise of ending endless wars is now watching his own coalition tear itself apart because he started one. And it's not happening behind closed doors. It's not quiet whispers to leadership. It's happening on the House floor. It's happening in legislation. It's happening with names attached and cameras rolling.
This administration can't even give us a straight answer as to why we launched this preemptive war. The president says we had to strike first because an Iranian strike was imminent. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense conceded there was no evidence of an imminent Iranian strike. Some told us this war was about nuclear weapons, but 6 months ago, we were assured our last strike on Iran decimated their nuclear program. So which is it? I think the most candid answer came from the Secretary of State, who told the press that Israel forced our hand and dragged us into this war again. And that truth is the very reason why it is Congress that must decide war. If American lives are to be risked and American blood is to be shed, that decision must be debated and voted on by the representatives of the American people. And that debate is meant to be arduous. And that vote is meant to be hard. I have a theory. I think my colleagues don't want to go on record because we have a terrible track record of meddling in the Middle East. They don't want their name associated with this when it doesn't turn out well. But Congress cannot be bothered with its constitutional duty because for many in this chamber, it's easier to simply allow someone else's sons and daughters to be sent to combat without their vote. And to be clear, we aren't even here to declare war today. All we're voting on is a war powers resolution to reassert the Constitution, that Congress must decide questions of war. And if Congress wants war, then the Speaker should hold a vote to declare it.
Here's what just shattered the political reality inside the Beltway. Representative Thomas Massie didn't file a protest. He didn't issue a press release. He dropped a legislative bomb that forces every single member of Congress to pick a side. His bill to block unauthorized American military action in Iran isn't some symbolic gesture. It's a direct constitutional challenge to the president's authority to wage this war without coming to Congress first.
Iran has not attacked the United States, Congress has not declared war, and Congress has not granted specific statutory authorization. Beyond the constitutional question, here lies an even more important one. Why are we going to war with Iran? Have we learned nothing from the laundry list of wars and regime change experiments we sparked across the Middle East that have racked up a total of at least $8 trillion of debt in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan? A sustained war with Iran will not stabilize the region. It's already ignited the region. It will radicalize new generations of terrorists, and it will send more swarms of refugees into Europe and the United States. Iran is not Venezuela. The Ayatollah was not a president. He was a religious leader from a region notorious for radical Islamists. And the United States and Israel turned him into a martyr. And in the process of doing so, we've already expended billions of dollars, and more solemnly, 6 American families must now lay to rest their sons and daughters.
And then there's Rand Paul. The Kentucky senator stood on the floor and called the entire thing unconstitutional after just 13 days of strikes. 13 days. In that time, 7 Americans have been killed. 350 more wounded across the two worst single days of combat. The Strait of Hormuz has been mined. Oil prices detonated to $150 a barrel. China and Russia have formally thrown their weight behind Iran, and the Secretary of Defense just floated the idea of ground troops. This is not the smooth-sailing second term the administration promised. This is a political ship taking on water from every direction, and the crew is arguing about who punched the hole. Now, here's what the mainstream media keeps getting wrong. They keep framing Massie and Paul as outliers, as fringe voices stepping out of line. That analysis is backwards and dangerous because it misses the entire point of what's actually happening. Massie and Paul aren't abandoning America first. They're applying it. They're the ones holding the line while the administration veers off into the exact kind of forever war that Trump built his entire 2016 campaign on destroying. Think about the core promises. America would not be the world's policeman. Endless Middle East wars would stop draining American blood and treasure for outcomes that had nothing to do with American interests. Congress, not the president, would decide when the nation goes to war. Those weren't democratic talking points. Those were the foundational principles of the isolationist movement that powered the biggest political upset in modern American history. And now Massie and Paul are holding those principles up like a mirror to the current conflict. Unauthorized by Congress? Check. Draining American blood with no clear objective? Check. Draining American treasure while families pay $150 oil prices at the pump? Check. Producing outcomes that actively harm American interests, like China and Russia backing Iran while allied nations walk away? Check and check. This isn't dissent. This is ideological consistency. And that's why it's so much more dangerous to the administration than any attack from Democrats could ever be. Then Marjorie Taylor Greene stepped into the arena. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the most unshakable Trump loyalists in the entire House caucus, the woman who has defended him through everything, and she called it a forever war, in public, on the record. Those words matter because they signal something fundamental has shifted. When the loyalists start using the language of the critics, the political ground has moved beneath everyone's feet. Bloomberg is now documenting what they're calling a documented MAGA split. On one side, the isolationist wing that Massie, Paul, and Greene represent. On the other, the hawkish wing pushing to continue the campaign. This is not a minor policy disagreement that gets worked out in caucus meetings over coffee. This is a public fracture over the central foreign policy commitment of the entire second term, and it's happening in real time while 350 wounded Americans are recovering, while impeachment proceedings are active on the House floor, while the Republican majority that was supposed to be the governing machine executing the agenda is busy fighting itself. So let's get specific about why the Massie-Paul revolt matters more than standard congressional squabbling. The Massie bill to block unauthorized Iran action lands in a completely different category than the war powers resolutions Democrats file every time a Republican is in the White House. This is legislation from a Republican applying the constitutional argument that Congress authorizes war, not the president. That argument has been the beating heart of the America First foreign policy critique since day one. When Massie drops that bill, he's not betraying the movement. He's reminding everyone what the movement actually stood for before the machinery of power corrupted it. He's saying the constitutional principle Trump campaigned on, that American military power shouldn't be deployed unilaterally by the executive without legislative authorization, applies to this war exactly the same way it would have applied to any war launched by Obama or Biden. The principle doesn't magically change because the president has an R next to his name. And here's the trap the administration cannot escape. Trump cannot call Massie a traitor without acknowledging that Massie is applying Trump's own stated foreign policy principles more faithfully than Trump is right now. You can't scream about ending forever wars for 4 years and then expect the people who believed you to stay silent when you start one. The isolationist wing Massie and Paul represent isn't some tiny faction that can be crushed with primary threats. It's a massive chunk of the Republican base. These are voters whose entire political identity is built on anti-interventionism. They didn't sign up for this. And when Rand Paul stands on the Senate floor calling the war unconstitutional after 13 days, That's the Senate dimension, making the legislative threat real and bipartisan in ways that complicate everything. Paul has been the most consistent constitutional voice on war powers for his entire Senate tenure. His opposition has never depended on which party holds the White House. His characterization of this conflict as unconstitutional isn't political calculus. It's the consistent application of a principle he's advocated across multiple administrations. And in a Senate where impeachment articles might eventually land, having Republicans like Paul publicly calling the war unconstitutional means the bipartisan threshold for conviction looks very different than it would if constitutional concerns were contained to the Democratic caucus. The Fox polling showing 40% of GOP voters opposing the war explains why Massie, Paul, and even Greene are willing to break publicly rather than managing concerns through private channels. Politicians make public breaks when they calculate that the political cost of public loyalty exceeds the political cost of public dissent. When 4 in 10 Republican primary voters are on the side of the revolt rather than unconditional support, that changes the math completely. In primary districts, where the threat usually keeps members in line, 40% of the voters are now looking for someone who will stand against the war. That's not a comfortable margin for anyone worried about challenges from the isolationist right. And in the competitive general election districts that determine control of the House, the combination of 40% GOP opposition and much higher overall opposition among the full electorate makes public dissent even more attractive. The MAGA split Bloomberg is documenting isn't being manufactured by Democrats or the media. It's being driven by documented political reality. This war is unpopular with substantial portions of both the Republican base and the general electorate. The economic consequences are being felt immediately by every American paying for gas, food, heating, and everything else that costs more when oil hits $150. And then there's Speaker Johnson. The man is dodging. The Speaker of the House, the legislative leader responsible for translating the president's agenda into law, for providing floor management and coalition building, is actively avoiding taking a position. He's not publicly supporting the unconditional surrender demand. He's not endorsing the military strategy. He's not providing the kind of clear leadership that would signal to wavering members that supporting the war is the right choice for the caucus. Johnson is managing his own survival in a one-vote majority with two-party switches, 5 Republican crossover votes, active impeachment proceedings, Massie introducing legislation to block the war, Paul calling it unconstitutional, and Greene calling it forever war. Johnson cannot afford to get in front of a parade that might turn around and run him over, and his dodging is itself a signal to every other Republican member that the political cover from leadership for supporting this war simply does not exist. When the Speaker dodges, you're on your own. Let's go deeper into what this isolationist versus hawk split actually means for the long-term future of the MAGA coalition. The America First movement has always contained 2 incompatible foreign policy impulses that Trump managed to hold together during his first term by not actually fighting a major war. On one side, the isolationist wing, the Massie-Paul libertarian constitutionalist tradition believing American military power should be deployed rarely and only with congressional authorization for clearly defined objectives with limited scope and endpoints. On the other side, the hawkish wing, the Bolton-adjacent tradition believing American military power should be used assertively to reshape adversarial regimes, that strength requires willingness to use force decisively. Trump held both wings together by threatening military action constantly while rarely following through in ways that produced significant casualties or sustained commitments. Maximum pressure, sanctions, rhetoric, but not the kind of active, sustained military campaign that forced the 2 wings to choose between their incompatible visions. The Iran war has ended that ambiguity forever. It's a real war with real casualties, real economic consequences, and no defined endpoint. The 2 wings are now forced to apply their incompatible principles to an actual conflict, and they're reaching opposite conclusions. The isolationists say unconstitutional forever war draining American blood for unclear objectives. The hawks say maximum pressure requires following through to demonstrate credibility and strength. Those conclusions cannot be reconciled through a press release or a social media post. They reflect genuinely different visions of what America First means in practice. The war has forced the choice Trump avoided his entire first term. The Massie bill's constitutional argument is the legislative weapon most directly threatening the administration's ability to continue the war on its current terms. It brings the war powers question into the House legislative process in a form forcing every Republican member to take a recorded position. A vote on blocking unauthorized Iran action is a vote on whether the president had authority to launch the war without congressional authorization. In the current House environment, one-vote majority, two-party switches, 5 Republican crossover votes, active impeachment proceedings, 40% GOP voter opposition, forcing that recorded vote is a political minefield. If the bill passes, legislative repudiation of the president's war authority by his own party. If the bill fails but attracts significant Republican support, it documents the scale of the caucus fracture in a formal recorded vote every primary challenger and every Democratic candidate will use in campaigns. If Republican leadership tries to block the vote procedurally, it feeds the narrative that the war is being sustained by preventing Congress from exercising the authority the Constitution explicitly gives it. The Massie bill is a constitutional accountability trap regardless of outcome. The Speaker is dodging because there's no version of engaging that doesn't produce significant political damage. Greene's forever war characterization deserves sustained attention as a political signal about where the MAGA base's emotional relationship with this conflict is heading. She's not an isolationist in the Massie-Paul constitutional tradition. She's a MAGA loyalist whose political identity has been built on enthusiastic support through every controversy. When she calls it a forever war, she's expressing a political judgment that this specific conflict is becoming a liability for the coalition she's invested her career in supporting. That's a different and more politically significant signal than principled constitutional opposition. Greene's break isn't about principle, it's about political survival and coalition calculation. She's looking at $150 oil, 350 casualties, no defined endgame, ground troops being hinted at, 40% of Republican voters opposing the war. She's concluding that continuing to be the face of enthusiastic support for this specific conflict is not a winning position for her or the movement she represents. When the loyalists start calling it forever war, the political sustainability within the MAGA coalition has reached a breaking point that principled opposition alone would never have produced. The revolt is real, the fracture is documented, and the political sustainability of a war that's simultaneously losing the isolationist base, driving $150 oil, producing casualties with no timetable, facing active impeachment proceedings, while the Speaker dodges in a one-vote majority, is the central question of this presidency right now. The answer Massie, Paul, Greene, and 40% of Republican voters are providing is not the answer Trump needs to sustain the coalition that was supposed to execute his second-term agenda. The Republican civil war over this war is accelerating, and every single development from here matters.